asking the questions mainstream journalists will never ask. This is your Richie Allen Show on richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, and triggerwarning.tv.
An old friend of mine is standing by. I mentioned earlier on he is a doyen of critical thinking, a professor emeritus of the philosophy of science at the University of Minnesota Duluth. He's an author, he's a broadcaster. I've been speaking with him for many years. Do me a favour, by the way, check out moonrockbooks.com. That's moonrockbooks.com. Bookmark that. And you can also read him at jamesfetzer.blogspot.com. We're going to round up a few stories. Delighted to welcome him back to the show. Our friend Jim Fetzer. Jim, welcome back. How are you?
Oh, Richie, it's so great to have you back on the air, my friend. Last time our conversation had consequences. We were talking about the Parkland school shooting, proof that it was fabricated. Since then, we've had another in Santa Fe, also fake, Richie. I'm so glad you're back on the air.
Thanks, Jim. I didn't go anywhere. It was the YouTube channel that got deleted, but you're right. It was a conversation you and I had that resulted in a strike, and then they went back 2 years and they struck off a couple of other videos and deleted the YouTube channel, which was a shame at the time. But thanks very much. It's not going to prevent me from speaking to you, my friend, or people like you. Far from it. The platform is here for alternative thinkers and people with evidence that needs to be talked about. I want to ask you, are you following this crazy story here about the Skripals, Yulia Skripal and Sergei Skripal, her father, who were poisoned allegedly back in March by Novichok, a Russian agent? She's emerged and given a statement yesterday. She looks very well. In fact, she looks very, very well. We've not seen sight of her father yet. That story, Jim, has all the hallmarks of absolute false flag or fake news. What do you make of that story?
Oh, 100%, Richie. If it had been the kind of military-grade poison that they were claiming, they and all the animals, they had a couple of canaries and dogs, would have been dead. He wouldn't have been walking around, for hours. It turns out the patent for this particular poison was from the USA, Richie. In other words, the whole idea was Russian, was total fabrication. The British government deeply involved, American government, just more fake news.
It's funny that, isn't it? You mentioned the US government. We talked about, I didn't believe it when I heard it, because like yourself, I'm skeptical until I see proof. But somebody wrote a book, and actually the book contained not only the ingredients, but the instructions on how to make Novichok. And it had been on sale through Amazon.com for a long time. It's the most farcical story, Jim. It's beginning to look like, maybe, I don't know what your opinion is on this, it's beginning to look like maybe Sergei Skripal never ceased working for MI5. Maybe he's still working for British intelligence. And this is about demonizing Russia. What do you think?
Oh, I think that's a highly plausible hypothesis, Richie. I think you're spot on, and that, that the public is being played again and again and again. We have so many absurd developments here, including, Mueller bringing this lawsuit against these Russian companies for purportedly using the American social media to manipulate the outcome, never imagining that they would show up in court to challenge him. They've done that. And now Mueller is trying to avoid a speedy trial because they're going to gain discovery and to expose the whole thing is just made up, Richie. I mean, he overplayed himself. This was a bridge too far.
Yeah, we're seeing it here as well. You're probably following the fact that the UK government is challenging Russian oligarchs in London to prove where their income originated. There's even a story here which is interesting. Chelsea Soccer Club, which is one of the biggest soccer clubs in Europe, its owner Roman Abramovich, of course, is Russian, and there were reports that his visa had been delayed to allow him to come back into the country because, again, there was questions over his finances. But Jim, that's very interesting because I reckon the UK politicians and the US politicians are playing a dangerous game because politicians, Jim, are filthy they're corrupt and they are filthy. And many of these politicians will probably have taken money from some of these Russians or their companies over the years. So it could get fairly messy, Jim, for some of these politicians. I wouldn't be baiting the Russian bear if I were some of these guys.
Well, not only for that reason, Richie, but the Russians have superior military equipment to Americans, where the American contractors like to have malfunctioning hardware because then they get these maintenance contracts that makes them additional billions of dollars. The Russians, however, because their economy is sparse, have to be very efficient and effective. As a consequence, they have the best torpedoes in the world. They have the best anti-ship missiles in the world. They have the best anti-aircraft missiles in the world. If we were to wind up in a war with Russia, it would not have a happy outcome.
Speaking of that, Jim, and you and I have spoken for many years about the elite plans to push us to the brink of a global conflict, a third world war, even a nuclear war. What do you make of Donald Trump saying today that he's going to cancel that planned meeting in Singapore with the North Korean Premier Kim Jong-un? That's a strange one. I mean, Trump's supporters are scratching their heads, those who still support him. What do you make of that? What's the reasoning? Is it because of the Zionist influence on Trump's cabinet? What do you think?
Oh, I do think so, yes. I think appointing John Bolton, who was a neocon, who was one of those involved in arranging, orchestrating 9/11 to create a pseudo-justification for the United States entering these wars in the Middle East, which were fought to benefit Israel. In fact, we have new revelations in emails from Syria about, Hillary acknowledging the assault on Syria, for example, is for the benefit of Israel. It has nothing to do with the United States. And I think this is all going to have, shocking ramifications. Bolton talked about the Libya model for North Korea, Richie. And of course, we all know what happened to Muammar Gaddafi. He didn't actually put up a fight. He was surrendering to a location specified by the Secretary of State. His convoy traveling under a white flag of surrender was interdicted. He was brutally murdered, castrated, sodomized with a bayonet. I don't think Kim Jong-un finds that a desirable model for North Korea.
That's a really good point. And the timing of those statements, not only by Bolton, but by Mike Pence, were strange to say the least. Do you think, Jim, I mean, you and I, again, we understand that we're never going to change the world through politics. The elites run both sides of the game. But I speculated at the beginning of the programme, I'm not naive, but I just wonder, maybe Kim Jong-un was serious about denuclearization. I mean, today, in front of a select group of journalists from around the world, including Rupert Murdoch journalists from Sky News, they blew up a well-known nuclear testing site. It seemed that the North Koreans were very excited about this meeting, really interested in it, really happy to go along with it. I mean, Kim Jong-un had met Mike Pompeo. Those meetings had gone well. Maybe, Jim, he was serious, Kim Jong-un, about opening the country up and changing things there. But of course, the Zionist neocon agenda, that doesn't suit them for North Korea to become, an open society, because then they can't bait Russia and China by using North Korea. Maybe I'm wrong, Jim. What do you think?
Oh, Richie, I think you're 100% right that this is what is going on, that they're doing their best to keep chaos in the world. They don't want peace to break out. Trump, I think, mishandled it because he has been looking forward to the kinds of recognition he would deserve if he were to manage this event with North Korea. But I would say at this point in time, it looks most unlikely. He's using as his flimsy excuse the idea that North Korea had insulted Mike Pence, the vice president. But it's clearly that Kim was distressed by the United States continuing with its military exercises with South Korea, and that even though we find South Korea entreating Trump to go forward with it, I think he's backed out because he realizes it's not going to work out. It's not going to be a piece of cake the way he'd planned, and that Kim actually is standing up for North Korea.
Thanks, Jim. I want to mention, by the way, moonrockbooks.com. That's one of the great publishing houses in the independent media, folks. You know, Jim is co-founder of Moonrock Books, which is hugely important for writers who have got stories to tell about some of the biggest historical events in the world. Accounts by writers that challenge the status quo and challenge established thinking. These are brilliant books, brilliant writers who wouldn't get published anywhere else. Check out moonrockbooks.com. You will find a book there, or more than one book, that's of interest to you. Do buy a book from Moonrock Books and help support it. It's a great initiative there. And you can follow Jim. I want to mention this again. It's jamesfetzer.blogspot.com. Jim, you've been following the protests, the righteous protests by Palestinians in Gaza, the right of return protest, of course, in the Nakba. And you believe, Jim, that the reported 52 or 60, I think it might be 60 plus Palestinians that were murdered, unlawfully murdered. You think, Jim, the number is actually bigger than that, do you?
Oh, there's no doubt about it, Richie. No doubt about it at all. And I think this is a case where the Israelis went a bridge too far themselves, that they have, committed a kind of slaughter against Palestinians who have a legitimate right to protest by massacring them willy-nilly. The whole world is opposed except for Israel and a few of the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, whose ethics and governments are tyrannical. There was an effort led by Kuwait, interestingly, for the United Nations Security Council to initiate an investigation that was vetoed by the United States. Surprise, surprise. But it carried over into the General Assembly, and now in a rebuke to Israel and the United States, the UN is going to launch a human rights investigation, completely appropriate, because Israel has been grotesquely abusing the Palestinians since the founding of Israel, and they have been, preemptively taking their land. I would say 95% of the land that the Palestinians occupied before the creation of Israel, even after its creation, has been absorbed by Israel. So now there's a tiny fragment left. We have the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and where and this is an interesting development too, Richie, it looks as though Congress is going to move to give Israel the right to claim the Golan Heights, which in fact is occupied Syrian territory, because it turns out the Golan Heights is loaded with gas and oil reserves, Richie. How's that for a new development?
Yeah, it's oil rich, Jim. If that's true, that is absolutely dreadful, of course, and I don't expect there to be any condemnation of it by the authorities here in the UK. You made a very good point there. The Human Rights Council cannot be stopped by a veto. They have decided to go ahead with that investigation, but the Israelis, smug and smirking as they do, they say, well, we won't cooperate, and they might actually prevent these people from entering the country, Jim.
Well, they may do that, Richie, but it's just going to redound to, worldwide criticism. Pulling out of the Iran deal was such a colossal blunder, and it's very obvious, again, that this is a reflection of the extent to which the Zionists control the American foreign policy. Trump claimed he had three problems, that it didn't go on in perpetuity but expired in 2025. But that's perfectly reasonable. We could always renegotiate an extension. Everyone agrees the Iranians are adhering to it completely, even the American experts. In addition, he said it didn't cover the inspection of Iranian military bases, only their nuclear. But the Iranian military bases have nothing to do with the nuclear program, where our own intelligence agencies all agreed that Iran was not or no longer pursuing nuclear weapons already in 2007, which they reaffirmed in 2011. Even the Mossad, Richie, came on in 2012 and agreed Iran was not pursuing nuclear weapons. And in the third place, Trump is saying it doesn't cover the development of ballistic missiles by Iran. But why should it? I mean, Iran has the right as a sovereign nation to defend itself. The second and third of these conditions are clearly to benefit Israel, which wants all the information it can have in anticipation of a military strike on Iran. It's trying to induce the United States to take that action itself, which would be utterly calamitous.
Will it happen, Jim? Will that? That's the $64,000 question. Will that happen? The Israelis are hell bent on a military conflict with Iran. You're right. They don't just want the blessing of the United States. They want U.S. troops inside Iran. Will they get that? Is that likely to happen?
I don't think it's likely to happen, Richie, but, in a situation of this kind, you can rule nothing out. It's very, very disturbing because Trump isn't showing the kind of independence that we expected from him when he campaigned as a candidate. In fact, the greatest attraction to the American people who supported him was he was promising to get us out of the Middle East. He declared that it had been a mistake to get involved, that we needed to reallocate those trillions of dollars to benefit the American people. Now he's increased our troops in Afghanistan. He's not relinquishing a role in Syria. He's even threatening Iran. And when the European Union nations are expressing their desire to persevere with the Iran deal in spite of the U.S. Removal, he is threatening them. Even Germany, with a gas pipeline deal with Russia, Putin has spoken out and said he will stand up to the United States against this gas line deal. What's happening, Richie, is these actions by the United States are creating a closer alignment between the European Union nations and Russia on the one hand, and between Russia and the responsible nations of the world with Iran on the other. All of it is unfavorable to the United States, which is becoming increasingly isolated and no longer can be regarded as a trustworthy or objective source for leadership in relation to any issue in the Middle East. Indeed, in my opinion, any issue in the world, when you throw in the botching of the summit with North Korea.
Jim Fetzer is our guest this hour. Jim can be found at moonrockbooks.com and jamesfetzer.blogspot.com. jamesfetzer.blogspot.com. Academic, of course, author, broadcaster, and a Marine Corps veteran as well. Jim, great to have Jim back on the programme. Lots of tweets on this. Keep them coming in. It's at Richie Allen Show. I suppose, Jim, there can be no doubt now that Trump was the elite, the hidden hand. He was their choice all along, and we were all fooled into believing that they wanted Hillary Clinton. You could argue they didn't care, but if they favoured anyone, it's looking now like they favour Trump. What do you think?
Well, Richie, I believe that Hillary would have been worse. She was much more of a Zionist even than Trump, in my opinion. She was responsible for the slaughter of Libya. She, together with John Brennan, then the director of the CIA, and Barack Obama, created ISIS in 2012 to put pressure on Assad and later to confront the Persian nation of Iran. Mike Flynn, interestingly, Richie, was at that point in time the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he opposed it. Because of his opposition, John Brennan recommended to Barack Obama that he should fire Flynn, which is precisely what happened. I do not believe that when Trump made Flynn his national security advisor, he had done anything even remotely improper. But the whole effort to sabotage Trump was very, very deep. It involved elements of the FBI, elements of the Department of Justice. Loretta Lynch is obviously one example. James Comey is another. Andrew McCabe is another. Mueller's whole investigation is falling apart. He's got nothing bona fide showing any collusion with Russia. And in particular, it's obvious that Trump wasn't involved in any collusion, Richie. In fact, two investigative journalists who followed the Hillary campaign published a book, Shattered, in early 2017, explaining that the whole Russian hacking meme was made up by Robbie Mook and John Podesta within 24 hours of Hillary's concession speech in order to distract attention from the incompetent campaign they'd run, to divert from focus on the contents of WikiLeaks, which led to Pizzagate, where John Podesta himself is pedophile in chief, and perhaps even especially from Hillary's own entanglements with Russia, where she sold off 20% of U.S. uranium reserves to Russia for a $145 million contribution to the Clinton Foundation, which required the approval of Barack Obama. So I say, Richie, if Julius and Ethel Rosenberg received the electric chair for sharing U.S. atomic secrets with the then Soviet Union, what do Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama deserve for selling off 20% of U.S. uranium to Russia for a massive bribe to the Clinton Foundation?
Yeah, a story that's hardly ever appeared in any mainstream media news report anywhere, and it's a massive story. But Jim, what do you do? Here's a question. It's rhetorical, I suppose, as much as anything. You talked about Libya, which was, a crime against humanity. And those responsible, Cameron, Hollande, and obviously Clinton and Obama, should be in prison for the rest of their lives. But Jim, we had the Chilcot report that condemned the criminality of Tony Blair and his cabinet in, taking us to war with Iraq for no good reason. And then we had the Foreign Affairs Select Committee report into Libya, which reported in 2015. And that was headed up by a member of Parliament called Crispin Blunt. And that was devastating for David Cameron. That report, which was a Westminster committee report, a Parliament committee report, basically said that Libya was a complete lie from start to finish. The threat that Gaddafi represented to his own people was a lie. They deliberately downplayed the presence of jihadists. Well, we know why, because they backed those same jihadists. The point I'm making is, Jim, these reports come out time and time again and say that these wars were criminal, they were illegal, they were terrible. It doesn't matter, Jim. Here we are again in Syria. We've been in Syria now for years, supporting lunatic Wahhabists, the head chopping brigade, ISIS. It's madness. What are people going to do, Jim? Because obviously you can't change things at the ballot box. We can make programs, we can make them professional, we can make them tidy and, put them out there, but it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. What can people do to stop it?
Well, that's a really serious question, Richie, because as Cynthia McKinney revealed years ago, even our Congress is dominated by the Israeli Political Action Committee, AIPAC, where new members of Congress arriving in Washington are asked to sign a pledge to put the interests of Israel ahead of those of the United States, where those who decline find themselves confronted with a well-financed alternative candidate, or even that their district has been redrawn and they no longer have a seat. Cynthia was able to overcome those obstacles to serve 8 terms, but even someone as stunning as Dennis Kucinich, whom I regarded as the smartest member of Congress, was unable to. His district was redrawn. He did lose his seat. It's all completely outrageous. You can write to your representatives and congressmen and to get on the straight and narrow, to acknowledge the realities. But frankly, we're in a very desperate situation because the United States political system is so thoroughly corrupt and compromised.
That's the thing, and we're seeing it here. And we've had a scandal, not a scandal, but we've had an ongoing, a never-ending story here where Zionist agents have convinced the UK media that anti-Semitism, a misnomer anyway, but anti-Semitism is widespread in the country, and that it's widespread in the UK Labour Party, which is the opposition party at the moment. And there's been no standing up to that. The leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, has not stood up to it. He's just bowed down to it. He's, basically, he's perjured himself to a degree in saying, yes, there is a problem with anti-Semitism, which there isn't. There is no anti-Semitism problem in the UK, not in public and certainly not in politics. It seems that there's not a man or woman alive, except for Kucinich and except for Cynthia, of course, and except for Tony Benn and others, but Tony Benn is dead now, and Sir Gerald Kaufman, who was Jewish but died last year. He was very much anti-Zionist as well. We don't have people in public life who are prepared to stand up and tell these people to, I'm going to use a bad word now, fuck off, go away. You know, this country should be run by the citizens of this country. It's not going to be run from Tel Aviv or by the agents of Zionism, but it is. We don't have people to stand up to it, Jim. Outside of the independent media, people are terrified of breathing a negative word against Israel.
Well, it's just outrageous. In fact, Richie, South Carolina has just added a law. Fortunately, it's not yet permanent, but it is temporary. That makes any criticism of the actions of the Israeli government anti-Semitic and illegal. I mean, this is simply absurd. We're reaching a point where the Israeli efforts to constrain everything we discuss has become outrageous. We know they're using YouTube to dominate and take out all of the exposés about this series of fake school shootings, where Mike Adams just published a piece entitled "The Most Dangerous Mind in America," interviewed on false flags and extreme censorship, because he had noticed that not only were my videos being taken down, but videos of anyone who interviewed me was being taken down. In fact, you encountered the same problem with YouTube when you interviewed me about Parkland. Mike Adams did a brilliant article about it, and it's turned into a fascinating exercise because the discussion has been very extensive about Sandy Hook, where, Richie, believe it or not now, the New York Times has just published today an article about truth in a post-truth era. Sandy Hook family sue Alex Jones conspiracy theorist. You mentioned my blog. I would encourage people to come, jamesfetzer.blogspot.com, where I have published a rebuttal showing that these lawsuits had no foundation. They were completely hopeless, not rooted in the facts, that we'd already established that the school had been closed by 2008, that there were no students there, that they made up the kids using photographs of other kids when they were younger. Indeed, it's now turning out some of the parents used photographs of themselves when they were kids. Richie, it turns out that we not only know that Noah Posner was made up out of photographs of the fellow supposed to be his older stepbrother, Michael Vabner, but believe it or not, it turns out that Lenny Posner was Reuben Vabner. He was Michael Vabner's father. In other words, his whole persona as Lenny Posner is an elaborate charade and a fake. It's embarrassing. It's that bad.
And yet I've seen him do so many interviews. Now, I must point out to our listeners, the interview that I did with Jim about the Parkland shooting and conversations I've had with Jim about Sandy Hook, I'm going to say, and I'm never one for patting myself on the back or giving myself praise, or as the French would say, sending yourself flowers. But in those conversations I've had with Jim, I repeatedly put the devil's advocate side of things to Jim. Jim doesn't care. He's an academic. He's used to ideas being challenged and questioned. Rigidly asked him time and time again, but this person said this, but this person said that. That's the essence of presenting. And yet, even though we did it properly, those videos were deleted from YouTube, along with a lot of other videos as well. And yet you see this guy Posner all the time. Jim, let me just say this. If the New York Times is right and Alex is being sued, for those who remain convinced, as you do, that the whole thing was one elaborate production and hoax, that would be very good news if it was true, wouldn't it? If Alex was to be taken to court, because obviously if you are sued for libel or if you are sued for, misrepresenting the facts, you have the right, and your counsel has the right, to challenge these people equally as well in a court of law. So it would be a wonderful thing, Jim, for those who believe that Sandy Hook was a complete hoax. What do you think?
Well, it appears, and this is my great fear, that Alex Jones may be planning to take a dive over this, which would be intended, because he's so prominently identified as a conspiracy theorist in the public mind, as a smear on all of us who do serious conspiracy research. You cited moonrockbooks.com, Well, I bring together the best experts on different aspects of these cases. Each of the books I've edited has 12 to 15 contributors. They're there on JFK. They're there on 9/11. They're on Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, Orlando, Dallas, Charlottesville. I'm now completing editing a book about Parkland, Richie, the very subject you and I were discussing.
Yeah.
And it turns out they even sent the students home at 1 p.m. that day. It was Valentine's Day. That's why we didn't have 3,500 students there, why we didn't have hundreds of videos by students with their cell phones. They weren't even there.
Jim, just on that, I certainly don't want to be interrupting you or preventing you carrying on there, but I'm just mindful that time is against us. I just want to go back to Alex and look. There's nobody more of an advocate of free speech than me. There are plenty of people who are equally advocates of free speech. I will defend the rights of anybody to assert a position on any issue and to give their reasons as to why they feel that. And I'm not patronising Jim in saying that. I have a lot of time for Jim, and I have a lot of sympathy with a lot of the facts that Jim has put in the public arena before in the past. I just want to go back to Alex. You believe, and I've not spoken to him for ages, but I've still got avenues of connection to him. You think that he might settle out of court rather than take it on and go head to head with these people and try to expose them, meaning that maybe he doesn't believe it anymore, or that he's just going to wimp out. Is that what you think?
I'm worried about that. I'm honestly worried. I have sent representatives of Alex mountains of information. I even previously published a blog you can find online, How We Know the Lawsuits Against Alex Jones. It's entitled Sandy Hook, How We Know the Lawsuits Against Alex Jones Are Malicious, where I lay out the basic evidence, including that we found the FEMA manual for the 2-day exercise, which I included in the book, which I released to the public for free as a PDF when it was banned by Amazon.com. That we have demonstrated the photograph of the policewoman leading the kids to safety was staged, that there was a second photograph showing a lot of parents were there with their arms folded, hands in their pocket, while the policewoman rearranged the kids to get a better shot. We have 50 photographs of them furnishing an empty house to serve as the Adam Lanza resident, another 50 of them refurbishing the school to serve as the stage. InfoWars initially published one of our photographs where you see the SWAT team. I've been told it was actually the CSI, the crime scene vehicle, is there before the shooting. You can tell it's before the shooting because there's a string of windows in classroom 10 that are undamaged. After the shooting, they'd be shot out. The flag is at full mast. Wayne Carver, medical examiner, is there with his arms folded, awaiting the arrival of his portable mortuary tent. They have crime scene tape up for a crime that is yet to be committed. Alex Jones, when the book was published, InfoWars published a very good copy of this, which was up for 38 minutes. It had 178 comments already, but they took it down, no doubt because the photo credit was to Connecticut State Police. The Connecticut State Police were running this up behind the scenes. They were doing the logistics. They were setting things up. And therefore, they had to take it down. It's all in the book. Anyone can download for free. Just go to your browser and put in "Nobody Died at Sandy Hook," and you'll have your own available copy, compliments of me.
Thanks for that, Jim. And I just want to point out, I have offered invitations over the years, around the time I first met back in London when I met Wolfgang Halbig, and then speaking to Jim, I've extended offers to people in the area to say, look, if you want to come on and dispute what people like Jim have been saying, you can do so in an atmosphere of fairness and, transparency. And I'll put questions to you like the questions I put to Jim, but those offers were never taken up. It's how heinous a world we live in if these events are being staged as Jim passionately believes. And I've read Jim's book, and he makes some very compelling arguments. Equally, of course, if Jim has got it wrong, and Jim will say absolutely I do not have it wrong, but if he has done, Imagine what the people must be going through. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare scenario. But I do believe, I've seen enough evidence over the years, that agents of the deep state do create these elaborate hoaxes, as well as genuinely kill people to blame it on other parties for agendas that are sinister in the extreme. There's no doubt about that. Jim, I've loved having you back on today. I absolutely endorse moonrockbooks.com. Do check it out, folks. There are authors there, learned men and women, who offer alternative explanations for many of these big news events that we talk about, and historical events as well. And I recommend you read Jim. It's jamesfetzer.blogspot.com. Jim, 30 seconds. I'm giving you the final word, my friend, and thanks again for coming back on.
Well, Richie, I think you're a wonderful host. I think your talk show is one of the best in the entire world. It's a great honor for me to join you again. I'm very grateful for you bringing me back. And if people want to discover the latest, Richie recommended both Moonrock Books and my website, jamesfetzer.blogspot.com. Check out New York Times exemplifies post-truth era by declaring war on Sandy Hook truth. It's stunning.
Jim, have a great weekend. We'll catch up again in a few weeks' time. Always a pleasure. Thanks for your time today.
My great pleasure, Richie.
Cheers, Jim. The lovely Jim Fetzer live on the phone to us there from Wisconsin. Jim's an academic, a broadcaster, author, and a Marine Corps veteran as well. Check out jamesfetzer.blogspot.com and moonrockbooks.com.